Good afternoon, this is Daniel here with Cops and Cons TV. I want to welcome everyone in and thank you so much for joining us a little bit early today. We're about 30 minutes earlier than usual, so again, just want to thank everyone for being a part of the show. Just so you get the structure down, so a little bit of a roadmap, we're going to go over some of the most important and interesting police and crime stories from the last week. Some of them are some updates, but really we had a bunch of interesting things happen this week. So I'm going to go through some of those stories, give some of my thoughts and takes and opinions on those stories. But even more important than what I think about these cases, I'm really interested, like always, what our viewers think about these cases. Maybe I'm saying something where you think that there is something that I'm getting wrong, or maybe you live locally in the area where one of these incidents occurred and you have some information that, because a lot of stories are local stories and some are national stories. So, maybe someone who's local might have a little bit more information on what's going on the ground. So, as I'm going through these cases, please make sure you put all your comments and questions in the chat. I will try to get to as many of those as I can so we can go back and forth. Again, thank you so much for being here. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and make sure to share it with your friends so we can get as many people as possible in here on these live shows. And it's important to subscribe to the channel so because like today, some days we come on 30 minutes early, want to make sure that everyone who wants to be a part of the show is in the show. Again, my name is Daniel. You can go ahead and follow me at Police Law News on YouTube, Substack, and TikTok, and everywhere else. And let's see where everybody is from today. Sergeant George, hello from California. So Sergeant George is one of our regulars here. Haven't seen you in a couple weeks, so glad that you are back with us. Let's see. We've got Sergeant George. Happy Valentine's Day. We got some people in from College Station, Texas, and hello from we got some funny people in here today. All right, and here we go. So the first case that we're going to talk about is it's something that so earlier in the year. Later in the year, late in the last show that we did in 2022, I went through what I thought was the most important cases of the year. Not just when it comes to, the most people died, but, really when I talk about an important case, it's what kind of impact does that case have? So a lot of cases are interesting, but important police cases have effects and really do more affect more than just the individual case. So here's what I mean by that, and it's when it comes to the Officer Christopher Schur shooting. This is the shooting of Patrick Loyola that happened in April of 2022. This was the case where Patrick Loyola in Grand Rapids, Michigan, he ran after a traffic stop. He took the officers, or had possession of the officer's taser. There was an officer-involved shooting. That officer, Christopher Schur, is now charged with second-degree murder. So at our last show of 2022, I said this was the most important case going forward into 2023 because for a couple different reasons. And there was a recent update on this case. That's kind of why I'm rehashing this a little bit. The reason why this case is important and why police officers really all around the country either do or should care about this officer-involved shooting when officers typically don't care about every officer-involved shooting. Because think about it, there are approximately 1,000 deadly officer-involved shootings every year in the United States. It would be impossible for every police officer to really be concerned. But when police officers are at coffee shops or in briefing, the cases that they talk about and are concerned about typically have a couple of elements. The first of those elements is that it has to be something that's objectively reasonable, that at least is in the ballpark of officers thinking, yeah, okay, I see what the officer was doing, and then the officer has to be prosecuted. So it's when those two elements, that's when you get the attention of police officers and then a lot of different groups that are aligned with police officers and support police. Because you have to have police officers say, if I was in that situation, I would have done the same thing. And then sitting back and them realizing that doing the same thing would land them decades in prison. So that's where I talk about the Christopher Schur shooting. I'm not going to get into all the facts of it. This was absolutely 100% lawful and justified case. I've gone through in detail before. But there was a motion hearing today. So Christopher Schur is charged with second-degree murder. The motion hearing today was essentially motions filed by the defense of Christopher Schur, essentially trying to get the case dismissed. The judge already found that there was probable cause, but the defense attorney filed a couple other motions in order to. So really what the motion hearing was about today was just to try to figure out what law are we going by. And, I'm going to break it down as simply as possible. The argument from the prosecutor is that police officers in Michigan, per the law, do not have any other rights responsibilities, or authority to use deadly force than a regular citizen. Now, that should seem absolutely crazy because police officers clearly have more rights, responsibilities, and authority than a normal citizen. Otherwise, it seems like the prosecutor is saying that they support vigilantes in the state of New Mexico, or not New Mexico, in the state of Michigan. Or why would anyone call 911? Why would you call a police officer if any citizen just has the ability to use deadly force against someone who's committing a felony? So we know that isn't the case, and the defense attorney from Christopher Scher, he was basically trying to get the court to rule on motion that he's trying to get the court, well, one, to dismiss the case, but if not, to at least set the law, because and the judge basically said no. It was a really quick hearing, and it was irritating because they wouldn't allow any streaming in there. So we're kind of just getting secondhand reports and hearing from the attorneys about what happened. But essentially, the judge said that the elements were there for second-degree murder. The only question, the only thing outstanding is, was this self-defense from Officer Scher? And the judge said, and this part is probably correct, that self-defense, it's just what it sounds like. It's a defense. So, the appropriate people to weigh that defense based on the evidence and the charges are the jury. So if they're not going to dismiss the case on probable cause, which is where I think the case should be dismissed, I understand the judge not making a ruling on self-defense and leaving the fact-finding to the jury, which is the jury's job. So I understand that when it comes to the legal process, but there was a hearing today. It did not go the way that the good guys wanted because the case was not dismissed. It should go to trial. It should go to trial it's scheduled for March 23rd. However, if Officer Scher's attorney appeals, and if the appeal is going to be heard by the next highest court, that court date could absolutely absolutely could get it pushed back. So I just kind of wanted to update everyone on this, and because. And I should say this, that when it comes to police and self-defense, there's a lot of really interesting and strange things. So there's actually a case in New Mexico where a state police officer had a shooting, and the suspect claimed self-defense, and that was in federal court. The case ended up being a mistrial. The feds are retrying it, but we do have the body camera footage on this channel, so definitely watch that. It was a strange thing for a defense to say that they were trying to defend themselves from a police officer when they were the ones who were being violent in the first place. So we'll definitely put the body camera in there too, because a lot of these cases are kind of related when it comes to the facts. So back to the Christopher Scher case. So if you're interested in this case, whether or not you think Christopher Scher did the right thing or not the right thing, or if you just want to learn more about the case, I'm going to direct you to a Facebook group. It's called Stand With Scher Facebook group if you want to go ahead, and that's where there is a lot of information about this case. Let's see if we have any comments about this. Let's see. Tammy says, hello, how are you? From California. Love everything you do. Well, Tammy, hope that you are doing well. Sharon from North Carolina, welcome in as well. Sergeant George says, at first I didn't want to believe what Joe Biden said when he was mentioning about how police officers need to be retrained, but after I saw the evidence, it all began to make sense. Okay, we'll get to that here in a second. John Vandal talks about fat cops. He's mentioned that a couple times today. Okay, great, fantastic. So it sounds like John wants to fund the police departments so that police officers can get more rest, maybe help them pay for good food and gym membership. So it seems like John wants to put more funding into police departments for that kind of stuff. John, I agree with you 100%. Sergeant George, furthermore, deadly force can also be used if the lives of other people are in danger. I agree 100%. Lucid Dream says, when cops are held to higher standards than the citizens, then I will begin respecting them. Okay, well, I guess you would have to give me an example. So when Lucid Dream, when you say something like that, here's what I'm looking for when it comes to honest criticism. Say, here's the standard that normal people are set to. Here's the standard that police officers are set to. And here's my objective evidence of why the police officers aren't held to a higher standard. So if you actually take it a couple steps further and break it down, Mr. or Mrs. Lucid Dream, you will see that police officers are held to a higher standard, and they absolutely should be. Okay, so if you want to go ahead and there's definitely more information about the Christopher Scher case. I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago, so Last week I recorded an interview with Law Enforcement Today Radio, and that goes to radio and podcast. I did an interview. I think it's going to come out this week where I talk about the Christopher Schur case there in a little bit more detail. So, definitely go ahead and look for it there. The other case, so really the next case that I want to talk about, and so the video of the Tyree Nichols case in Memphis, the video between Tyree Nichols and the Memphis Five, that hit pretty much right after we did the show last week. So we did the show around lunchtime, and the video came out last Friday evening at about 6 o'clock Memphis time. So we didn't get to talk about the video. Now, we had a pretty good idea to note that video was put on Vimeo. It was too violent for YouTube, but you can definitely find the videos there. There's 4 different videos. 3 are body camera footage, and then 1 is a pole camera. It's essentially a camera that's on top of a street light that is run by the city of Memphis. So we kind of knew what was going to be on the video, and the reason that we knew is because the chief of police, the DA, and then of course the attorneys for Mr. Nichols' family, like Ben Crump, who I absolutely don't trust when they say things, but when the things that Ben Crump were saying were confirmed by the district attorney's office, who's going to have to prove charges in court, and from the police department who fired the officers, so when it's kind of confirmed by them, when all 3 are saying the same thing, it would be really, and they say we're going, not doing a Paul Pelosi hide the video, but they're saying we are going to release the video this day and this time. It would be, I said it last week, it'd be really strange if the video shows something other than what everybody has said, right? So we think we knew what was going to be on it, and everyone who's wanted to watch it, again, I just gave you the instructions on how to do it. Everyone who wants to watch it can. It's absolutely horrific. The charges against the 5 police officers who beat Tyree Nichols, my opinion, those charges are valid from what I could see. Now, of course, we have incidents in this case where, is it possible that all 5 police officers aren't as guilty as each other? Sure. I'll be honest, I haven't gone through, this is what this officer did. I just watched the videos. I can't tell which officer is which because I don't know them. I don't know them personally. And, the best videos from that pole camera, and you can't really see the officers' faces. So it's difficult to tell exactly who did what unless you know these people like on a personal level. But, certainly the officer who is kicking Tyree Nichols in the face and the officer who is smashing him in the head with a baton, certainly they would be more comfortable, more culpable than officers who were maybe just standing around not stopping. Now, I'm not excusing that. And there were actually 3 officers in the George Floyd case that were convicted of lesser crimes for not stopping Derek Chauvin. But the difference was Derek Chauvin got 22 years in prison. The other officers all got between 2 to 3. So could that be the case here where the officers who were actually beating Mr. Nichols in the head and in the face when he was under control, are they more culpable than the officers who weren't doing that but were on scene? Sure. I think that's probably reasonable to say, but having charges filed against all 5 who were there, I'm completely good with that. So just to talk about it a little bit, to break this down just a little bit, and again, I'm really curious what you all think, so put your comments in the chat. I will try to get to those. So here's what's strange. So the traffic stop was essentially, this is a street crimes unit that was called Scorpion, and I think I said it last week that, it's just a bad idea to have a law enforcement unit, a police unit named after a violent predator. Like, that's probably a bad idea, and that shouldn't be a controversial thing to say. But the Scorpion unit is essentially a street crimes unit, which in general is a good thing, is needed. Having officers on the street level who are doing some undercover stuff, some responding to calls, being proactive, and again, yeah, I mean, this is not, so we're trying to do like actual community policing by having these street crimes groups. This isn't like WWE community policing. Like, that's not what we're trying to do here, but it seems like that's what they were doing. So these street crimes units are important because a lot of times they're not in marked cars, but they do have lights, so they can do traffic stops. They do some undercover stuff. They respond to calls, and they try to stop crime in the moment. Like, the idea of that is absolutely a great thing for cities to do to combat violent crime if you're trying to save lives. Now, if that's not your goal, then no, police departments shouldn't do that kind of thing. But putting these type of proactive units into high crime areas absolutely makes 100% sense. But obviously, because these units have more leeway, they're not just sitting in a radio having a dispatcher saying you need to go to First Street for this call. Like, they have more range, more ability, more freedom to kind of do what they want. So that means there has to be a pretty strict level of supervision. Didn't seem like that was happening. So let's talk about the traffic stop. So what the officer, I don't necessarily believe anything the officer said, and we'll get to that in a second, because what they put in their police report about how the use of force occurred, yeah, that doesn't match what's on the video. So anything I say, this is coming from the police officers, I'm taking it with a grain of salt, not because I don't trust police officers. I genuinely do trust police officers, but when I have objective evidence that these police officers lied, it's reasonable to say, yeah, I'm not just gonna blindly trust what they say. So what they are saying, the police officers, is that they pulled over Mr. Nichols for reckless driving. So reckless driving is a traffic offense. Typically, it's a traffic ticket. So when a police officer stops a car for reckless driving and they contact the driver, usually you ask for the driver's license and registration. Now, during this personal contact while they're at the car, if a police officer develops probable cause or reasonable suspicion of other crimes, then they can go ahead and investigate those crimes. Here's what I mean. So they stop him for reckless driving, and this is a situation that happens all the time where I'm going with this. They stop him for reckless driving. As they're having contact with him, they see signs of intoxication. Maybe there's bloodshot, watery eyes. There's slurred speech. There's an odor of an alcoholic beverage. Maybe they can see an open container. I'm not saying this happened here. I'm just saying that in general, this is how police officers are able to expand investigations from a traffic stop to something else. Is, you have what was there on the traffic stop, the reckless driving, and during this personal contact, you develop extra or other reasonable suspicion of a different crime. Well, then police officers can go ahead and investigate that crime. So my question is, in this case, how do we go from reckless driving, which is a traffic stop, a traffic ticket, to having him on the ground and being yelled commands in order to get on the ground? So what happened there? That's a really important thing. That's an important piece of this, and that's missing in the body camera footage. So at this point, we don't know if the officers, and this wouldn't surprise me, if the officer who did the initial traffic stop, if they just didn't have their body camera rolling, or maybe the body camera footage is so bad, like there literally is no reason to have him exit the vehicle and tell him to get on the ground. Maybe that's just so bad Memphis hasn't released it. So, but I kind of doubt that second one. The reason why is because they already gave us all the bad shit, like all the bad stuff about him being hit with the baton and the literal awful excessive force. They've given us all that, so why would they be trying to hide the initial contact of the traffic stop? Would be a strange thing to do. So, and I can't say what the motivations from Memphis are. Maybe they just wanted to get out the four most important videos. But the reason why this went from a normal traffic stop, which cops do tens of thousands of times a day across the country with no issues, how do we go from that to trying to get him out of the car for what seemed to be something that maybe he would get a traffic ticket for? Also, when Mr. Nichols is on the ground, so police officers in everything they do, especially when it comes to use of force, there has to be a lawful objective, meaning the lawful reason behind what the police officer is doing, that has to be it. The lawful objective would be, this individual I think he's driving drunk, so I'm gonna do field sobriety tests. My lawful objective is to do field sobriety tests to maybe make a DWI arrest, okay? That's a lawful objective. And then you have to use force in order to achieve that lawful objective. So, let's say Mr. Nichols had committed a crime that these officers were going to arrest him for. And I'm not saying that's what happened, but let's say that that's the case. Well, then what they would try to do is to get him into handcuffs. Well, that would be a lawful objective. Here's someone there's probable cause to arrest, and then we're trying to get him into handcuffs, which is the next step. And yes, if the individual resists arrest, we can use necessary, reasonable, and proportional force that is objectively reasonable to get him into handcuffs. So what I saw on that video, and again, body camera isn't perfect because it doesn't see what the officer saw, but it's like having an eyewitness and us being able to see what one eyewitness saw, okay? Body cam's not perfect, but it gives us a sense of what happened. So what I see on the body camera footage, and when Mr. Nichols is on the ground next to the driver's side of his car, the police officers were not trying to get him into custody. They were trying to use force. They were just trying to beat him up. That's what it seemed like, because at no point did I see an officer, these officers all probably outweighed him. Look at these pictures of these guys. These guys are huge. One of them was on the football team, I believe at West Virginia. I know one of them played Division I football, but what I'm saying is that it's not like each officer grabbed an arm and were trying to get it behind his back. That's not what they were doing. They were using pepper spray. One of them used a taser as he's running away, which is strange to begin with. But it didn't seem like their objective was to get his hands behind his back and handcuff him. It seemed like their objective was to kick his ass. That's not a lawful objective. That's excessive force. just right there is absolutely criminal. Then Tyree Nichols runs. And listen, I'm never on the side of someone who runs from police. I have a pretty strong history, and I think the people who watch me on this channel for the last year know that I always say comply with the police officers. Do not run, do not fight, because if you don't run and you don't fight, your chances of being harmed by police are really slim. I never say zero, because nothing's zero, okay? Because the Memphis 5 is always going to be out there. But statistically, it reduces your chances of being harmed by police if you comply. But Tyree Nichols did run. What I see on the video, he wasn't running because he was trying to get away from something or he just committed a crime and he was fleeing the scene. It seemed like he was running for his life. So this is literally the first time, and I've been involved in law enforcement, through school and policing and law school for over 20 years now. This is literally the first time where I said, I get why he ran from the cops, and that was probably the best decision in the moment. And I've never said that before, but I honestly think that's the case. Please put in the comments and let me know if you think I'm right track, wrong track on that. Then when they catch him, and this is the part we have to talk about least because it's the most obvious, 5 officers basically beat him to death. It's horrible. The medics get there. One of the medics, the Bosch, she doesn't even get out of the car. They don't address him right away. So 5 officers have been fired and charged with murder and kidnapping and aggravated assault and official misconduct. 2 other police officers are on leave right now. We don't really know why. We know one of the officers used a taser, but he wasn't involved in the actual beating. How much did he know at the time of the tasing? I don't know. He's not been fired. He's just on leave. So for that to be investigated, I think is reasonable. And then three of the medics have been fired for not following protocol and not rendering aid correctly. And here's some of my thoughts and opinions on this case. Here's what's problematic. These 5 officers who did this, they either didn't realize what they were doing was wrong, or they knew it was wrong, but they just didn't think that they would be held accountable. Both are problematic. Here's what they didn't think. They didn't think that a bunch of serious people, including us here over at Cops and Cons TV, they didn't think that serious people, educated people from all over the country were going to scour through their body cam video and the evidence. I mean, what they must have thought is that just an unserious use of force investigation that they could just bullshit their way through. That must be what they were accustomed to. So that tells me, because they were so comfortable on camera, that tells me that they weren't just that this wasn't the first time this happened, that this seems like a pattern. And because of that, this is a bigger systematic problem with Memphis. Now, a word of advice, okay? Here's a word of advice. If you are a good, decent, normal Memphis cop, get out now. Find another police job. It's not worth it. Do not go down with this sinking ship. The Department of Justice is going to be in Memphis, and based on what we see, and I never say this again about the DOJ, it's probably reasonable that the DOJ goes in there because the problems are unbelievably systematic in this police department. If you're a normal, regular cop in Memphis, get out now. This is a sinking ship. The next decade, the feds are going to be up everybody's ass. It's not going to be a good place to work. Find another department. All right, let's see what some of the comments are here. Gorgeous junk, hello. There's no excuse, but I heard that Tyree was messing around with one of the cop's ex-girlfriends and his baby mama, who he was apparently... Okay, thank you for bringing this up, Gorgeous Junk. I was going to mention this. I was on the fence or not, whether I was going to talk about it or not, but there was a rumor that started on the internets that the reason this happened is that Tyree Nichols was messing around with one of the wives of the police officer. So there is no evidence of that, and I'm an evidence guy. So you show me the evidence, let's go ahead and talk about the evidence and we can evaluate it and stuff like that. There is no objective evidence of this. Tyree Nichols' family, who, again, it's not Ben Crump, it's his stepfather, came out and said, yeah, this is bullshit, it's absolutely not true. So I'm gonna lean on that side, that this is a rumor started on the internet and it's already been debunked. No one serious has made this claim, and like I said, the Tyree Nichols' stepfather specifically came out and said that it wasn't true. I'm not a psychic. I don't have any other information besides that, but what we're looking at now, my guess is that it's not true. It's just a rumor. But again, stranger things have happened, but I would say probably not true. Let's say Motorjack 744. That was my old call. That was my old call sign. Motorjack was 744. Let's see. I can honestly say there's no use of force training that involves the officers holding someone up and the third officer throwing haymakers to his face and head. Motorjack 744. You have that call sign and you're unbelievably smart. I'm glad that they gave it to you because it's absolutely crazy that anyone would do this. This is not how policing is done. So you're 100% right. Let's see. Jason, the scary part is they did all of this knowing they had their cameras on. Exactly. Jason, that is exactly correct. 100%. They were so comfortable doing this on their own body camera. I mean, think about it. This is as crazy and as wild as like Scott Peterson taking a picture of Lacey's body before he dumps it into the bay. Like, this is nuts that they would record this themselves of what they were doing. Talina Taylor, as this case goes on, it's going to be interesting to see if the 5 officers knew Mr. Nichols personally. Yeah, I agree. It's going to be interesting. But again, I don't think that's part of it. Motorjack, let's see. I would not be surprised if evidence is produced that shows these officers had some sort of history. So Motorjack, I'm going to disagree because from what we know, Tyree Nichols doesn't have a criminal history. So again, unless the really strange rumors about him working at FedEx with one of the cops' wives. I don't know, but from what we know, Tyree Nichols literally does not have a criminal history. So a street crimes unit working in an unbelievably violent city probably wouldn't be worried about someone like Mr. Nichols who literally has no criminal history. So let's see, Sergeant George, or better yet, go find another line of work if you're in Memphis. Better line of work, different state. At least where I'm at, we've had a bunch of people leave our state in the last couple of years. They've gone to Texas, they've gone to Florida, and they've gone to Idaho. I can't vouch specifically for those states, but I've known a lot of people who have gone to those 3 states and haven't heard any complaints. So let's see, Officer Blue Gun, even if that were the case, why would 4 other cops throw their careers away for that? Officer Blue Gun, why are you asking such good questions? Yeah, that's 100% correct. So the last thing I'm going to say about this rumor about Tyree Nichols and one of the cops' wives is, let's say this was the case. Like, this doesn't, if anything, it makes it worse. So here's why I think this started, because most of us look at this and we go, okay, we can see, okay, if someone resisted, they did this, but the beating for what Tyree Nichols did, it seems like the beating was just like the two don't match. So there's something has to be in the middle, and people are trying to fill that middle with rumors. Or maybe people are just thinking out loud. But if this is true, this actually makes this worse. So it actually makes this worse that it was like a personal kidnapping and beating. And if anything, the charges should be enhanced. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too far, but could it be that one officer had this personal vendetta, started it, and then the officers just followed along because this is just how they act there. This is how they conduct themselves. I don't know. Okay, that's all I'm gonna say about that case. Obviously, we're gonna be following this case for the next couple years. This is worse than the George Floyd case in my mind, and I'm glad that there weren't riots and that most people's businesses and homes were pretty safe. Okay, next case I want to talk about. So this is the Anthony Lowe. So this is a case that I thought was interesting, and again, put in the comments if you think that I'm right track, wrong track on this, because I had a couple different conversations about this case. So Anthony Lowe, Huntington, California. I don't understand the controversy of this case. It's my opinion, and I'm going to stick with this opinion, that the facts of a specific case are just more important than the victim status of any of the participants in a particular case. And here's why I make that statement about this case, is because Anthony Lowe is a double amputee. So he had both legs amputated above the knee, which is called a transfemoral amputation. Mr. Lowe uses a wheelchair. However, he can still move around pretty quickly on his residual limbs. So he had he had amputations on legs above the knee, but he is still able to, I guess, kind of walk on his residual limbs, what he has left. So that's kind of what we're going with this. So there was a call for service in Huntington, California, that an individual was stabbed. Here's what the police knew going into this, is that the victim told police officers that they were stabbed by someone. The description they gave is someone in a wheelchair, got out of a wheelchair, was armed with a 12-inch butcher knife, approached them, stabbed them for no reason, then got back on the wheelchair and left the scene. Now, again, just because that's what the initial caller says or the information police have, certainly that doesn't mean that that is 100% true. Otherwise, cases wouldn't be investigated and police would just listen to whatever the original 911 caller said. But that was what the information police had. So now the job of the police is still, surprisingly to a lot of people, to apprehend people who commit violent felonies, right? That's still a thing police do. So police officers get on scene. Now they have a description of the subject. So if they describe me, a 40-year-old white guy who has really, really fucking gray hair, I mean, there could be a lot of people, depending where you are, who look like me. But in this situation, there's not a whole lot of people who are in a wheelchair holding a 12-inch butcher knife. There's not a lot of neighborhoods in the country where that combination is going to be a thing. So police officers get on scene, within a block or so of where the stabbing happened. They found Mr. Lowe, who is in a wheelchair armed with a giant knife. So it's reasonable to the police officers, at least meets reasonable suspicion to detain him for this crime. Hope we don't have any disagreement there. So police officers try to contact him. They give him commands. He hops off his wheelchair, and that's why I said, even though he has residual limbs, he can still move pretty quickly on them. I mean, someone earlier today made a comment about fat cops. I could line up 5 fat cops I know who cannot move as fast as Mr. Lowe did. And the reason we know this is because there was a witness who had like a cell phone video. It's not great quality, but there is some video of this where, again, who knows how long he can move quick for, but I'll be honest, Mr. Lowe moved quicker, at least in a short distance that we can see on the video, than I expected him to be able to. So the police officer, they give him commands. He doesn't listen. He hops off the wheelchair. He starts kind of, I'm gonna use the word running. He kind of is running away. Yeah, I should also say that there is a wrestling champ that he fights in the MMA, and he's actually an amputee as well. So yeah, I mean we see this where just because someone has that just because someone has the transfemoral amputation doesn't mean that they are prohibited or you shouldn't take them as a threat if they're armed with a knife, right? So anyway, so it's so police officers contact with him. There's a progression of force. They give him commands. He doesn't listen. He hops off the wheelchair. He's still armed with this giant knife, right? Then he starts running away from the police officers. They then try to use a taser, which is reasonable. He's running away with a knife. He's committed a violent felony. They try to use a taser, a reasonable use of force. Well, the taser doesn't work then, and this is what we don't know because we don't see it, because yes, it's caught on video by a cell phone video, but when the actual shooting happens, the Mr. Lowe and the officers kind of go behind a vehicle that's blocking the way, and we don't have the body camera footage yet. So if what the police officers are saying is true, here's what the officers are saying. The officers are saying that as he was running, he stopped, he turns towards the officers. He either advanced towards the officers with the knife or he tried to throw it at them. So I'm gonna go on record to say that if either of those are true, we don't know because we don't have the body camera footage yet, but if the account from the police is true, that he either charged at them with a knife or looked like or tried to or was in the motion of throwing the knife at the police officers, yeah, deadly force is 100% true. I mean, deadly force is 100% a reasonable thing for police officers to do. Because I mean, it's Mr. Lowe was missing his legs, not his arms. He could still throw a knife. Again, so if the body camera confirms the account of police, 100% justified, but obviously people are going crazy about this in California, and it's kind of like the Ma'Khia Bryant case. The Ma'Khia Bryant case is the 15-year-old who was killed by the police officer as she was in the act of stabbing another 15-year-old girl. The police officer shot and killed her. That's one of those cases where there was immediate riots and protests about it. So the police department put out the body camera footage, and then everyone was like, oh, okay, what the cop said is true. Yeah, I guess he kind of had to shoot her. And there were no riots or protests after that, So this is the kind of case that if what the cops say is true, they need to release this body camera really quickly because he's an amputee and because so he could be a sympathetic victim, if this wasn't a lawful, justified officer-involved shooting. So I hope they release the body camera footage quick because it seems like it's a reasonable shooting. Let's see. Officer, okay. Let's see. Sergeant Georgia, how can a sort of handicapped man who is barely able to move around the place hold a knife to begin with? That's the only thing I wanted the answer to. Yeah, Sergeant Georgia, so I don't know if you've seen the video. Like I said, it's cell phone video. It's not great cell phone video, so I don't know if this person had like a flip phone or something, but I would encourage you to go watch the short video. And yeah, he hops off the wheelchair and he moves, kind of like runs, jogs quicker than a lot of cops that I know would be able to. So he actually moved a lot faster than he did. Officer Blue Gun, tasers have a 40% failure rate. Officer Blue Gun, thank you for saying that. That's something I've talked about a bunch of different times. There's something called it's 3 acronyms and then the word reports. A something something reports. I can't remember exactly. I don't think it's ACM reports. They did a study on tasers using the Los Angeles Police Department. I believe statistics from like 2015, 2018, and they found that 40% of the time that tasers did not have the desired effect for one reason or another. Officer Blue Gun, I know that you know this, but for other people, because it's, when you fire a taser, it's two different, it's essentially two different prongs that come out of the device. Both have to strike the subject. If it's too close together, they're not gonna have the desired effect for the neuromuscular incapacitation. Also, if someone is wearing heavy clothes, it's possible that the effect of the taser isn't going to be there. For one, or the officer hits with one probe but misses with the other one. For one reason or another, tasers do not have the desired effect 40% of the time. Meaning, and I hope this is where Officer Blue got APM reports. Thank you so much. I knew I had Officer Blue. I know I had it was three letters. And the first one was A and reports. APM reports. All right. So it's like, imagine a situation like this where, if you have someone who's bearing down on you with a knife, you have a taser, and there's a 40% chance this is gonna miss. And then if that happens, I'm not gonna be able to transition fast enough, and this guy's gonna stab me in the throat. So it's reasonable police officers would want to avoid that. What I mean by that is if someone has a knife and they're running away, I get using a taser. They turn around, they square off, and they either move towards you or going to throw it. That's no longer a situation for a taser. It's absolutely not a situation for a taser. That's a deadly force situation, 100%. Jeremiah Osborne, less than 60%. Yeah, I would say that's probably correct. Let's say Jeremiah Osborne, what's the hit range for cops shooting bullets? I don't have that research in front of me, Jeremiah. That's a really good question. I have looked at it before, and maybe someone like Officer Blue Gun knows those stats. But here's what I remember from the research I've seen on that, Jeremiah, is that in close quarters combat, shooting with officers like in less than 10 feet, police officers miss about half the time. So it's not great. And the reason why is because police officers are normal people. And we know, especially from the research that like Force Science has done, that the human body doesn't perform great under stress. Human beings aren't great under stress. And an officer-involved shooting is literally the most stressful time in someone's life, most likely. Most officers go a 20, 30 career with never getting into a shooting. So the 28 seconds that someone is in a shooting, probably the most stressful 28 seconds of someone's entire life. The idea or the expectation that they're going to perform well under that stress isn't a realistic performance of a human body. And we know from research that that's just not a thing. So yeah, in close quarters combat, less than 10 feet, I think cops miss about half the time. So hang on. So 2006 analysis, which examined a number of major metropolitan police department shootings through the 80s and 90s, found that hits rarely exceed 50%. Our producers here just looked that up, and what I remember about the research is correct. I didn't know the exact number. Let's see. James Echo, after all these. Let's see. Okay. All right. Okay. So next case. Okay. So that was the last. So next case I want to talk about. It's not a use of force case. This case is actually this case is actually terrible. We had a police officer who died in the line of duty, and the circumstances around these, sometimes it's always tragic when a police officer loses their life. But when the officer doesn't even have a chance or ambushed, a lot of us take that, even like you're not even giving the guy or girl a fair fight. So this happened in Selma, California, a couple days ago. Officer Gonzalo Carrasco. He's 24 years old, police officer. He had 2 years on the department, on his way to being a father. He was shot and killed this week. Some of the information that we have so far is that essentially he was on patrol in the city Tuesday on day shift. I think it was around lunchtime. A woman flagged him down. He did what a good police officer should do: is someone flags you down, you stop. A lot of times, a lot of police officers, someone will flag them down, and as they're going by, they'll wave. They'll be like, I don't want to deal with whatever their problem is. But Officer Officer Carrasco's a good officer, and he did the right thing. He got out, contacted the woman. The woman said, "Hey, there's someone suspicious who's in my curtilage area in my house in my front yard." So she requested police assistance. He decided to help her out, which again is absolutely what police officers should do. So he essentially exited his vehicle. As he exited his vehicle, he started to walk over to the individual who was on the woman's property, and without warning, without notice, the person took out a gun, shot, and killed him. Officer Carrasco didn't even have a time to draw out and fire any return shots. This was essentially an ambush. The woman who called police, there's no indication from what I saw that she was involved or anything like that. So this was absolutely an ambush. It was horrific. Suspect was arrested a short time later. He faces multiple charges such as murder, felon in possession of a firearm, as well as a probation violation. So our hearts go out to the family of Officer Carrasco. And if anyone has earned a Memphis-style beating, it's that guy. Last thing I'm going to talk about today is a little more on Memphis. So I mentioned the George Floyd case earlier today. This case is, in my opinion, this is like Daniel Shaver-esque. This is Randall Worcester type stuff, where this is just an unnecessary use of force by police officers. And, it's easy to just blame the police officers. And when it comes to criminal charges, we should. As I said a couple times today, the criminal charges are absolutely appropriate. But when something like this happens, and when it seems like the officers are just so comfortable doing it, it screams that there's something more systematic about it. So not taking the blame from the police officers, again, they absolutely should be charged. No issue there. I think they should be charged and face the max, whatever it is, because this was absolutely horrific. But there's probably other things going on in that city. And if the Department of Justice comes in, this is the kind of things that they're going to look at. So let's look at Memphis just a little bit. So Memphis, earlier this year, I wrote an article. I talked about some of the most violent cities in America. And in my research, I found that Memphis was one of the top most violent cities in the country. And that's something that I didn't realize. This was, I think I wrote the article back in early October. And this is something I hadn't realized. I didn't know that Memphis was such a violent city. I've been studying criminal justice related issues and bachelor's degree, being a police officer, master's in law school for, again, over 20 years. And I just didn't realize that Memphis was one of these really violent cities. So let's put some of the violence in context, right? So in 2022, Memphis had 302 homicides. And again, is that a lot or a little? It's like the thing in Seinfeld with where the chicken runs and Kramer goes, the chicken ran from my house to Newman's house in 18 seconds. And Jerry goes, "Is that good?" And Kramer goes, "I don't know." So it's like, without context, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So in Memphis, 302 murders. Memphis has approximately 600,000 residents. Okay, so let's compare that to other cities that also have around 600,000 residents. Not nice, reasonable cities. Let's take Albuquerque, New Mexico. So I always talk about Albuquerque. If you watch Breaking Bad, that's about right. Albuquerque, New Mexico is almost always one of the top 10 most violent metropolitan areas in the country. Albuquerque has around 550,000 people. So Albuquerque, New Mexico is about the same size as Memphis. Last year, Albuquerque, New Mexico set a record with how many homicides they had, and they had 120. 120. Memphis had 302 last year. So again, Albuquerque, one of the top 10 most violent cities, set a record with 120 last year. Memphis had 2.5 times more homicides. So when I say it's unbelievably violent, so I think, so you know what, it was actually, so if we take the city of Albuquerque, it was 120, but if we take the county and kind of the metro area and other shootings that are ruled justified, it was about 173 in Albuquerque. But at least what the city of Albuquerque is reporting, which again may not be correct, but I'm also going by what the city of Memphis is reporting. So 120 versus 302. So again, a similar sized violent city. You can see how violent Memphis is in comparison. The other way I'm going to put this into context is New York City is 14 times, when it comes to population, New York City is 14 times larger than Memphis. They only had 418 murders last year. They were 14 times. New York City is 14 times bigger than Memphis. They only had 110 more murders. I mean, so the violence in Memphis is absolutely crazy. So I just want to leave people with this thought. Is it any surprise that Memphis police, who are tasked with fighting this violence, this unnecessary violence, are using unnecessary violence as a way to achieve their objective in stopping violent crime. Not saying it's justified, it's not. But the fact that Memphis is so violent, I think that breeds a place where police officers feel like sometimes that they have to use violence as well. So again, it's not justified, it's criminal, but you wouldn't expect police officers in really nice areas that have no crime to act like this. So there's something more systematic and sinister going on in Memphis, and my guess is the DOJ is going to be there very soon to figure it all out and more. So if you are a reasonable police officer in Memphis, it's time to start looking for other jobs. And that's going to be our show today. So I know we did the show a little bit early. I want to thank everyone for joining. We had some really great comments. If you didn't get all your comments in, you can still put them in because on YouTube you can still watch the show live later on, or you can watch the show after. And I pretty much check the comments all week and have a lot of fun going back and forth with people. So definitely put comments in there if I wasn't able to address what you got to. Love to have conversations and engagement with people during the week. Again, my name is Daniel. Please go ahead and follow me over at Police Law News pretty much everywhere. And if you haven't already subscribed to our channel here at Cops and Con TV, please do so you know when we have our live shows. And if you haven't already, please share this channel, which is met with as many friends and family. And we do have some great body camera coming out this week as well. So definitely stay tuned to that. And I hope everyone has a safe weekend. Thank you.